Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Spark to Sport. Before we start, as always, please make sure to have your microphone on mute and camera off. If you wish to ask any questions, you can do so by pressing the button Show Conversation and type up your questions in the dedicated section. Quick reminder, in case you have not been able to attend some of the talks, you can access them via the UCC Sport website or the UCC Sport YouTube channel. So today's guest is UCC Director of Sport, Morgan Buckley. Morgan graduated from a physiotherapist from Trinity, as a physiotherapist, sorry, from Trinity College Dublin, and holds a master degree from Victoria University Wellington. As well as being the Director of Sport and Physical Activity in UCC, Morgan is the Director of Sport of Cork Sports Partnership, a government-backed agency for growing sport and physical activity in the wider Cork region. He worked for World Rugby as a General Manager of Development and was responsible for leading the World Rugby development programs, working with no less than 120 members union and 6 regions of World Rugby. So, Morgan, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Jeff. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So, just to start it up, could you give us maybe a brief understanding of what path led you to UCC Sport?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm going to just take you through a couple of slides and maybe my journey through sport and how I got here. Okay. I'm from Kildare originally, grew up in Naas, and when I was growing up in Naas, I played many different sports. There was an article last week how our generation in the 70s and 80s is perfectly geared up for the times that we're in because nothing happened, maybe except sport. We were locked out, so we played tennis, we played rugby, we played soccer, we played GAA. I lived in the tennis club in Naas in the summer, I lived in the rugby club in the winter, and in school played Gaelic games. And I guess part of my message today is the power of sport to make lifelong connections and friendship. I worked as a coach. When I went to Trinity, I was on the Irish University's team. If there were scholarships in place nowadays, I probably would have gone off to the States or, maybe had a different career. But I played top level tennis and I also played rugby. Trained as a physio and worked after my first recession in 1987. I graduated from Trinity when there were no jobs in an embargo in recruitment. I worked in the States, I worked in the UK, and I went down to New Zealand where I lived for 6 years. And when I was in New Zealand, I got involved playing rugby. I got involved playing GAA. I became president of the Wellington GAA. We set up the New Zealand GAA. So it's one of my photos there is we used to play out at a field that we secured from the city council, played in the Australasian GAA Championship, and been involved in sport, tennis, rugby, and Gaelic football at an instant community. And I was lucky enough then to meet my wife, who's from Cork. In Wellington after a GAA final. We went back to Molly Malone's in Wellington, and which was our headquarters. And like all good things Irish, you go halfway around the world to meet an Irish woman who's from Cork. And if you know anything about Cork people, Cork is the centre of the universe, and I've been living down here for the last 20 years. In between that, I would have ran a sports management business working with clients all over the world, and that hit the last great recession in 2008. I was lucky enough to transfer into World Rugby, where I'd done a lot of work with rugby, and I worked for 8 fantastic years developing rugby around the world. And my experiences, I had to set up a program called Get Into Rugby, which ultimately ended up in about 135 countries. We shipped equipment, programs, resources all over the world. And you can see from the plains of Africa, where we got kids involved in rugby, to Afghanistan, where they played rugby in front of bombed out buildings. And the World Cup was part of the Asia Impact program, taking rugby to the foothills of Nepal. And I guess part of that 25 years involved in running rugby is that the basics are fairly similar no matter where you are. You need people, you need coaches, you need equipment, and you need a very basic framework to support people to mobilize as they do. You also realize that sport is fundamentally political. There's a huge amount of politics. There's a huge amount of negotiation. There's a huge amount of people that maybe are distant from the day-to-day sport, making decisions on sport from something that happened long ago in their youth. I was lucky to be connected with programs that grew participation and got kids all over the world, boys, girls, playing rugby. It was a fantastic opportunity. It was exhausting. It was a privilege, but I lived in Cork and went up to Dublin every Monday, came back down on Friday. And in between, I traveled to 60, 70 countries, which certainly you couldn't be doing in this climate because travel is going to be curtailed for quite some time, I think. I think the other part then is my journey of working in sport over the last 20, 25 years. And maybe some of the challenges that we faced in growing sport on the ground in areas where the resources are thin is to gear us up for this current environment that we're in. And I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about that, if that's okay, Jeff, if that gives you sort of a snapshot of the environment and maybe where we're heading for the next few minutes.
Absolutely. Walk away.
So just imagine, I was down in Dingle New Year's Eve, and there was just this fantastic atmosphere. The streets of Dingle at midnight were thronged with people having fun. We're on beaches, 2020, the 20s, the roaring 20s were about to kick off. And who would have thought 5 months later that we were in such an absolutely turned up environment? And thinking about it, training as a physio, I dealt with an awful lot of people that were really in terrible condition. I worked in rehab in the States, where people had suffered spinal injuries, head injuries. A lot of the military people I had to work with who'd come back and were still having treatment after wars, etc. And really their world was complete chaos and turmoil, and you had to sort of bit by bit help them try and get back walking. I've always applied some of my physio training into sports management. So in the military, there's this term called VUCA, which is what armies and soldiers have to deal with. A volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment. And really that's what we're in at the moment. We've no certainty. There's no clear roadmap. There's a huge degree of uncertainty. It's complex. In UCC, we have 55 different clubs. We have to interpret the policies, the terms, the conditions of a government framework, a Sports Ireland framework, and 55 different sports governance framework. That's complex. And it's ambiguous, it's uncertain, it's not clear. So I think in the environment we're in, we need to maybe not get too far ahead of ourselves, break things down into small chunks with achievable goals that are reachable. Obviously, the big picture goal is to win this battle, is to protect people's health, restore ourselves back to as much normality, but we don't know what normality is. And I think it'll be a while before we see that happy, sunny picture of 2020. It'll be a year that we will never forget. It'll be a defining era for what we do. So our challenge really in UCC Sport is to deal with this VUCA environment. And we've got a fantastic sports environment. We've got over 4,500 people that participate in club sport. We've over 13,000 people that partake in the Mardak Arena as students in terms of daily physical activity with the wider community. We've got Olympic athletes who are preparing for Tokyo whose plans have been upended. So with the team in UCC, we've developed a plan with 3 phases. One is transition. And that transition phase probably kicked off the 12th of March when the Taoiseach made the announcement that we weren't continuing as is. So it took a while to make sure that we're all in line, to try and build the lines of communication, to try and figure out what can we do, can't do in this new environment. We've heard the word new normal, but we really don't know what normal looks like. So we've had that transition where the roadmap is becoming a little bit clearer. Luckily, I've had a lot of contacts globally and worked with colleagues in Australia, New Zealand, Canada. We've reached out to those. On the board of Student Sport Ireland, we've set up working groups and we'll look at facilities, we'll look at sports development, competition framework, and we'll also take the best medical advice. So whatever the government and Sport Ireland does, we'll try and land it in this environment. So from June to September, we will then engage in a prepare phase to see what can we realistically do. How do we manage expectations? And there's no doubt that sport is going to be disrupted majorly at national level, at local level in the next 12 to 24 months, I think. So we need to prepare. We need to see, in terms of what can be done that's high risk, what can be done that's low risk. Already we're seeing golf, tennis, athletics coming back in. But for us, we operate big facilities, indoor, outdoor, and it's not straightforward reopening those. The university is setting up a campus business continuity team, and we will take our lead and advice from them, because clearly we're part of a much bigger collective of 20,000 students and 2,500 staff. So we'll go through this preparation phase, and then we'll deliver, and we'll deliver in two parts, semester 1, semester 2. And I think breaking this down into short packages of 2 to 3 months ahead, this is what we can do. We'll be able to deal with the variables that will come along. And I think my experience in sport over the last 25 years, both in Ireland and internationally, says deal with the controllables. Mm-hmm. Set the long-term goal that we do want ultimately to come back to a very vibrant sports system, but we're facing a high degree of uncertainty. We don't know what that looks like. So what can we deal with reasonably over the next period, knowing that there will be a number of quarters ahead of ourselves? I'm confident that we will be able to deliver a new but different sports model with social distancing. Clearly, we need to keep people engaged in physical activity, online, in the facilities. We know that the Marduk Arena team will have a huge job laying out their facilities. For every 6 machines they've got, 2 will remain in situ. So they've got to space those out. We're lucky in UCC, we do have space. And I go back to, again, get into rugby in the plains of Africa. They had loads of space. Maybe you have to create some new environment for these guys and to operate in. So we have space. It's how do we reimagine that space? How do we reprogram it so that we can have social distancing that's safe? Those are the thoughts that go through my mind in terms of this phase. But then I think as we get into the new phase after this, we've got to reimagine what our future would look like. And there's a lot of discussion going on around the world as to where to sport. I think what's been very interesting in this country, in the roadmap, it talked about, the health and safety, about stabilizing, but it also spoke about keeping people well. So we've set up a Keep Well channel in UCC. The government roadmap has brought sport into it. And also around the world, people are seeing the power of sport and physical activity for keeping communities engaged, for giving hope. And I think in UCC, we've got to look and see how do we reimagine that. And again, I'll go back to my lifelong involvement in sport, is to see what are the things what's the glue that will help us? So the glue that will help us is that we've got connections. We've got to reinforce those connections, that community. That's fundamental. All my connections over the last 25, 30 years have been through sport. I've got a local, regional network. When you're involved in sport, you've got an instant community. That's what I found in Wellington when I went there. I knew nobody. And after a short period of time, by joining so many different clubs, you were engaged. When I was in Trinity, you were engaged. When I lived in Naas, sport was our life. So we've got to reinforce those connections. We're going to have to review capacity, because we can't manage the same level of capacity with social distancing. So that's going to need reimagination in terms of programming. Effectively, you've got to half everything that you do. The buses around the country will have half the capacity. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a big challenge because we've got huge demand. There's an inherent risk in sport. If you take part in sport, it is risky. You're putting yourself on the line. Tennis was my sport. You had to engage in battle every day. You had to seize up the challenges. You had to, when you played rugby, it was a risk. So what's the tolerable level of risk? There's no risk-free sport. There's always, you're risking yourself, you're risking your emotion, you're putting yourself on the line. We've got to manage that risk. And then we've got to innovate and thrive. We've got to see how do we keep people involved and connected using technology, using good membership systems, looking at different formats of the sport, maybe non-contact to start with, progressively introducing contact, progressively introducing different types of sport that will help people engage until we can get back to what we did before. I think there's no doubt, Jeff, that we're in change. And, you know, if I look back from the start of the year to where we are now, it's been fundamental change. We've ripped up the whole template for how we run countries, how we run society, how we run sport. And that change environment is difficult, it's frightening. So I think people will need to gear up slowly to change, but also know that we will have to change, and it's adapt or stay redundant. So in my job, leadership, again, we'll go back to those physio skills. We know that we've had a major incident. We know that ultimately we can get people back up to a new way of existing. If you've been paralyzed, okay, you can live independently in a wheelchair. And my best friend was in a car crash 25 years ago. We've forgotten that he's even in a wheelchair, but it's a very different life. So we need professional help that can see, yeah, look, there will be a roadmap, there will be a step. It may not be exactly the way we looked at it, but it's step by step, it's quarter by quarter, it's not going too far ahead of ourselves, it's adjusting, it's bringing people with us, but it will change. And I suppose finally my message would be, we need to remain resilient and optimistic. I think if sport teaches anything, is this power of being resilient. Resilience is key. When I was a kid growing up, I would have lost tons of matches playing tennis, and eventually I would have decided the last year enough is enough. I would have trained, applied myself. I read The Inner Game. You train your mind, you train your body, and eventually you turn all those losses into wins. I think it's easy to give up. I think it's easy to despair. But I think in sport we have this resilience. We have good days, we have bad days. I work closely with John Tracy, the chair or the CEO of Sport Ireland, and I always remember asking him, what did it take to become Olympic champion? He won a silver medal for in the Olympics in Los Angeles in 1984. And two things struck with me. He said, one, never skip a training session, no matter what it takes. Two, embrace the pain, because for every loss, there will be a win. For every win, there will be a loss. There will be more bad days than good days. And, you know, for every success, there will be many days where you don't have success. But ultimately, if you're clear in the goals, if you believe and you're optimistic, you will get there. And I think sport teaches us that. It teaches us the value of friendship. It teaches the value of connection. It teaches us the value of community. You build those lifelong friends. You build those communities, which are way more important than the winning or the losing, but you learn many lessons along the way. And I think those are my messages. So my 25 years, both in sport, academics, third level sport, international sport, all bring me down to this fantastic challenge that we've got here in UCC. And I guess I'm lucky I'm not traveling as much as I did, because I'd probably be half dead by now. So I'll leave it at that and maybe open up back to you for some
thank you
questions and discussion.
You know, that's interesting, from the plane of Africa to Cork. It is quite a trip. My question is, I would like to go back to the environment and UCC Sport more generally. I mean, if you look at the environment, for example, Starbucks was able to create that third space, the space between work and home. And Starbucks is not necessarily known for their coffee, but the environment they give, the experience they give to their customer. And what would be your vision for UCC Sport ultimately as an environment for the student athletes?
It's that everybody realized their full potential. That you would decide as an athlete, what is the potential you would like, that you'd be inspired as to what it is that you would like to be able to do. If you'd like to take part in a team sport, an individual sport, I think when people come from second level into third level, it's a time of great exploration. So if you want to take part in sport, there's a home for you. If you want to excel and progress in the next stage of your career, there's expertise for you. Ultimately, I believe that we can be a key third pillar in Irish sport. There's 225,000 students. There's 31 universities and technology institutes of technology. Through Student Sport Ireland, which I'm currently a board member since February, I think we all realise that this is a really powerful, maybe unseen, hidden force in sport in Ireland and physical activity. I think we need to organise a little bit better and to mobilise. But really, we play a key role in transition on journeys in from second level into third level, journeys from your time in university into the next phase of your life. And the lessons that you learn in this period of your life can stick with you for the rest of your life. The connections that you make can stay with you for the rest of your life. It's a really time for grounding. So I think that vision is to realise and unleash your full potential.
You worked with so many different countries, different people, different environments, different scenario at your time when you were in World Rugby. What have you learned there that you can apply in this environment, that through the crisis we are going? Because people will require change, but not everyone is willing to embrace changes, because if you change, that's bringing you outside your comfort zone, and not everybody is comfortable with that. What have you learned that you can use in your environment?
I think it was very humbling going to different countries and seeing maybe the resources that people didn't have, and you appreciate the fantastic facilities. You know, you'd go to places in Africa where really they only had a bare pitch of ground, but they had a passion and an enthusiasm. So our job was to give them a framework in which to work with, tools and resources. I went to Madagascar, and on the way in from the airport, it was fields being ploughed by ox and cart. It was like the biblical days, and they were literally being, it was like, my God, it's like back to the Bible. And then sitting on the farmer was sitting on a satellite phone, with a satellite phone, talking to friends, and they had state-of-the-art 3G. They didn't have landlines because the infrastructure just couldn't put it in, but for technology and satellites, they'd gone to a mix of the Bible meets the 21st century. It was absolutely fascinating, because you could do stuff with technology and sharing resources and information that if you couldn't do with other infrastructure. So it taught me that imagination is the key. You got to reimagine and find different ways. You got to give people the resources and the tools and then let them off. They will find very creative ways of doing things. We've got fantastic people and communities. I think we need to set out a framework that allows people maybe see something different, but also to reimagine their potential. Resources aren't always the limiting factor. It's more how you mobilize and utilize resources in a different way. And
more personally, are you value driven? Are you performance driven? Maybe a combination of both. What is the thing that is driving you? Is it success? Is it process? Is it outcomes? What is it?
Yeah, I suppose I'm driven by my own experiences in sport. I just loved playing sport. I loved being active. I loved going for runs. I wish the body was in better shape, the knees and the ankles. And I was also struck again in rugby where people had this concept of sharing their experience. So I guess what drives me is that I'd love everybody to have a good experience. I'd love them to probably have even a better experience than I had. So if sports science and conditioning expertise and coaching was available now that I would have loved to have when I was growing up, you even apply yourself better. I'm driven by getting results. So what does the client want? What does the university want? What did the community want? Then maybe applying my physio and sports management training to work out, well, how do you get there? How do you get that result? I experienced lots of politics in sport that gets in the way of it. So you kind of try and go, well, let's not let politics block what the participant wants. Ultimately, let's keep more people going. So it's a mix of things. But ultimately, I believe in the power of sport. I believe in what it does, and I believe in the connections that it generates.
And you briefly talked about results. From where you are in your life right now, how do you articulate success? What is success means to you?
In this job or every day?
Every day and in the job.
Success means looking back with no regrets, I think. Okay. I think it was interesting, again, going back to my physio days, I would have worked in intensive care. I would have worked with people that were in terrible position. I would have worked with a lot of older people. In the UK and the US, people who've been through World War II, Vietnam Wars, all sorts of different things. And they all kind of said, don't look back, seize the moment, seize the opportunity. So what success looks like is reaching out and achieving the best possible result that you can get in every day. And sometimes that leads you to try and improve things, to drive forward, to see where you can improve. I guess I'm influenced by trying to leave things in a different place, by trying to listen to what people want, and then driving on with it as best we can. At the end of the day, you've one life to lead. We're all going to hit the dust at some stage, and try and do as much as you can, and help as many people as you can.
And to a little bit capitalize on what you just said, what would advice you would be to any potential student athlete coming to UCC, freshers, first year, not knowing it's a pandemic, we don't know if there's going to be any contact sport, and any sports allowed in September, what your advice would be to them?
First, be patient, because we're really in something that's really unknown. It is an uncertain environment. It's VUCA. We're not going to be able to provide all the solutions. There's a huge degree of patience is going to be required. 2 is be optimistic. It will sort itself out. There was a fantastic video produced for the Sunday game, the Boys of Summer video, and at the end of it, it said, this too will pass. I think we've got to believe it'll pass, but it may not happen for 24 months. I think there's a lot of people going through terrible hardship, and I think you need to be humble and reflect the hardships that people are going through. But I think also the power of community, by being with others, by sharing your dreams, by sharing your frustrations, by being on a team, by being involved in a sport. Even if you can't participate, being able to talk and connect with those people that are in your sports circle is really powerful. And we're lucky that the tools allow us, with technology, video, Zoom, Teams, allow people to stay connected. So I say stay connected. So for new people coming in, we've got to get them connected, joined up, even getting active, running, jumping with space. I think that's going to be vitally important.
In relation to, at the moment, there's a lot of people, at home, exercising, walking a little bit, reading books. Have you read any books in the last couple of months that were like, wow, this is incredible? Do you have any books that you would recommend to people to pick up?
Funny enough, I've gone back to some of my old readings, some of them on leadership, looking at how people would have dealt with different crises in their own lifestyle. So personal autobiographies. I'm rereading a book called The Songlines, Bruce Chatwin, when he goes off around Australia exploring how people communicated and connected. I have a book that I use called Flex. It's how the Australian Air Force use for planning missions in a VUCA environment. Setting out a clear brief, short goals that are easily measurable. So it's a mix of that. And then I'm doing a lot of reading. A lot of the articles. There's some fantastic articles in different journals on leadership, looking at exploring how different sports are doing it. Mm-hmm. I'm also going back to different colleagues. Certainly, I spoke to a colleague in Australia Sports Commission that was very optimistic on the framework that they're producing for Australian sport. So yeah, dipping back into the archives.
One more question, because we're nearly running out of time, and I will ask you the same question I asked to Fiona Chambers. If you had access to a billboard anywhere Times Square, Paris, Dublin, Cork. What would you write on it?
Stay optimistic.
Okay. Morgan Buckley, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Looking forward to see you tomorrow. All right. Thanks.